Welcome back to Autism Unfiltered. I'm really glad you're here. This is session 4, and today marks the beginning of a deeper journey. Over the next few sessions, we'll explore what autism truly is, not through labels or myths, but through understanding, empathy, and lived experience. There's a quote by Charles M. Blow that really sets the tone for today's episode. One doesn't have to operate with great malice to do great harm. The absence of empathy and understanding are sufficient. That line says so much, doesn't it? Because often, the harm autistic people experience doesn't come from cruelty. It comes from misunderstanding, from assumptions, from help that wasn't really helpful at all. Many parents, teachers, and professionals truly want to do the right thing. But without listening to autistic voices, good intentions can still lead to harm. Throughout these sessions, I'll refer to non-autistic people as neurotypical. And if neurotypical people really want to support us, the best way to start is simple. Listen. Take in our feedback. And when we correct you or share information, try not to push back, because that's where growth happens. And growth is good. Embrace it. There's a wonderful passage from Taboas, Depka, and Zimmerman in 2023. I am an autistic person. My reasons for this are that identity-first language is the preference of the majority of the adult autistic community. This distinction matters deeply, because autism isn't something we have, like a coat we can take off. It's part of who we are. It shapes how we think, feel, and see the world. And history shows us that society has always struggled with difference. It wasn't until 1990 that the World Health Organization removed homosexuality from its list of mental disorders. And even being left-handed was punished in classrooms well into the 1980s. We now look back on that with disbelief. But when it comes to autism, that same lack of understanding still lingers. There are still people promising to cure autism, when what they really do is teach people to mask, to hide who they are. And that kind of help leaves deep scars. In 1993, Jim Sinclair wrote something that remains one of the most important statements about autism ever shared. Autism isn't something a person has, or a shell that a person is trapped inside. Autism is a way of being. That's it. Autism isn't separate from us. It colors every experience, every thought, every emotion. You can't take the autism out of the person, because if you could, you wouldn't have the same person anymore. Autism is simply a different way of being. Seeing the world differently can lead to some interesting moments. For example, when someone over 70 passes away, I don't feel shocked. To me, every day beyond that age feels like a blessing. But others react as if death were unexpected. It's a small difference, but it shows how differently autistic minds can process the same situation. Something else we need to talk about: the language people use. Terms like high functioning or mild autism sound harmless, but they're not. When I hear mild, I hear nearly normal. When I hear severe, I hear far from normal. Neither is accurate or kind. We are human, not levels. And how autistic someone appears often depends on the environment. I might look confident when I'm leading a training session, but in a noisy party full of strangers, I might look lost. I like to think of it this way. A penguin looks clumsy in the desert, but in Antarctica, it thrives. Autistic people are the same. When the environment fits, we flourish. Dr. Luke Bearden once said, "The heterogeneity of the autistic population is such that there will be differences from one individual to the next." That means no two autistic people are alike. If autism were music, each of us would be a different genre: classical, jazz, rock, or lo-fi. To understand a person, you have to understand their tune. But despite that diversity, stereotypes persist. You're funny, you can't be autistic. You make eye contact, you can't be autistic. You don't look autistic. That last one always makes me smile. Sometimes I reply, "And you don't look ignorant," yet here we are. But the truth is, those comments show just how misunderstood autism still is. And perhaps the most frustrating one of all, we're all a little bit autistic. It might sound harmless, but it's really dismissive. You wouldn't tell someone using a wheelchair, "We're all a little bit disabled." It minimizes real experiences and struggles. Neurodiversity is dimensional, not categorical. We may all relate to aspects of autism sometimes, but for autistic people, those traits are constant, every day, everywhere. For decades, autism has been viewed through two lenses: the medical model and the social model. The medical model says autism is a disorder, something to fix. It labels people as mild, severe, or special needs. The social model says something very different, that autism is a difference, not a defect, that it's society, not the person, that needs to change. Barry Thompson put it best. Please don't call them disorders. They are differences. You often hear people talk about the autism spectrum, which is now regarded as an outdated model in understanding autism. Let's take a look at his model, its history, and why it proved to be inaccurate. Originally, it was Leo Kanner, who was an Austrian-American psychiatrist, physician, and social activist best known for his work related to early infantile autism that helped shape the spectrum. Kanner originally lived in Austria but moved to America and published his paper on early infantile autism in English. Around the same time, Hans Asperger was a physician who was also from Austria and published a paper on Asperger syndrome but published in German. Because World War II was going on at the time, anything that was German was filed away, and it took until 1980 for Lorna Wing and Judy Gould of the National Autistic Society to translate Asperger's work. Once translated, they noted very similar traits to autism and added Asperger syndrome to the right-hand side of the graph, and this gave birth to the autism spectrum. Some people who received a diagnosis of Asperger syndrome continue to use this terminology to refer to themselves. Others do not, usually for two reasons: because the term is no longer used officially, and because of revelations about Hans Asperger, who Asperger syndrome was named after and who was complicit with the Nazis. In this image, if you can imagine a line ranging from 1 to 10, 1 to 5 would have been autism with a severe to mild learning disability. 6 would have been someone with an average IQ. 7 to 9 used to be high-functioning autism, and 10 would have been Asperger syndrome. The first problem with this graded approach is that it is very fixed and assumes that you cannot move from your original position, which, as we discussed earlier, is not the case, as how an individual interacts will be dependent on the environment at that time. The second problem is that if it is fixed, it assumes that if you are on the left-hand side, you are incapable of doing much, which is inaccurate because quite a few people from the left-hand side have gone on to write books, such as Naoki Higashida, who wrote the amazing book The Reason I Jump, or Tito Rajarshi Mukhopadhyay, who wrote How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? And if you are on the right-hand side, you will have very few problems, yet 80% of individuals on the right-hand side will struggle to find gainful employment. Another interesting fact is that in a study in 2015, Corchesne et al. Did a study on 30 nonverbal autistic children aged 6 to 12 years at 2 special schools in Canada. And when they were exposed to a standard IQ test, none were able to complete it. However, when the test was made visual to suit the learning styles of the individuals, 65% scored in the normal range, and 10% were at the 90th percentile. Results for all three tests correlated that individuals had better visual abilities rather than verbal. David Mitchell, who translated Naoki Higashida's book from Japanese to English and also has a nonverbal autistic son, states, "I believe that while severe nonverbal autism does indeed look like a severe cognitive impairment, the truth is it is not. It's a severe sensory processing and communicative impairment." The DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is in its 5th edition, published 2022, actually removed the diagnosis of Asperger syndrome and replaced it with 3 levels of autism, categorizing the severity of symptoms based on the amount of support an individual needs in daily life. Level 1, requiring support, indicates minimal support needs, while Level 2, requiring substantial support, and Level 3, requiring very substantial support, require progressively more help with communication, social skills, and handling daily life challenges. In my opinion, this is no different to how the original spectrum looked, and so is just as misleading, because dependent on the environment will depend on the level a person will present as. The circular example is a much better example of the spectrum, showing that each individual has different areas of ability to others with the same diagnosis. If you imagine that the person is the center circle, then each area can fluctuate because of stress and anxiety. Medically, it states that 40% of autistic children and 50% of adults struggle with anxiety. However, in my experience, I have never met an autistic person that doesn't struggle with stress and anxiety. This fluctuation is where teachers show a lack of understanding when they make bold statements such as, "Well, he could do it yesterday, so he's choosing not to do it." Here's the thing. Yesterday, everything went well, so this person's stress levels were relatively low. However, on the way to school this morning, there was roadworks and mom had to drive a different route to school, and today he has got a substitute teacher. Anxiety is high, which impacts on his ability to cope, and it won't take long before a meltdown ensues. This child is not choosing to do anything. They are simply unable to focus on the lesson. That's not refusal. That's capacity. So as we wrap up today's session, I want you to remember this. Autism isn't a puzzle to solve or a tragedy to fix. It's a different way of being, a way that deserves respect, understanding, and celebration. In our next session, we'll explore how autism is diagnosed and what receiving a diagnosis can mean, for self-understanding and for growth. Thank you for listening to Autism Unfiltered. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and be kind to difference.